Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, January 12th. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. A group of synthetic chemicals known as PFAS are found in everyday products like nonstick pans and waterproof clothing.
Exposure to PFAS has been linked to all kinds of health problems like cancer, decreased response to vaccines, low birth rate.
Coming up, we'll learn how these forever chemicals are being found in unexpected places. But first, today's headlines. California's high-speed rail is still a long way from its goal of taking passengers across the state, but Governor Gavin Newsom announced a key step forward on Monday during a special visit to the valley. KVPR's Joshua Yeager reports.
Newsom is hammering down on a ceremonial railroad tie just outside Bakersfield. He's marking the beginning of a new phase in the bullet train's construction.
We are here to lay some track to make real and visible all of the hard work over the course of the last decade.
Workers will soon build a railhead here. It's the first step towards actually getting any track laid and comes 10 years to the day since construction first began. The rail is still far from completion. A first phase from Bakersfield to Merced, about a third of the total route, is set to welcome passengers by 2033 if all goes according to plan. Newsom says it's an investment in the Central Valley's future.
This is not just a transportation project, this is a transformation project.
The bullet train, though, is likely to face blowback from a new Trump administration. For KVPR News, I'm Joshua Yeager in Bakersfield.
Governor Gavin Newsom also proposed a new budget yesterday. He's proposing a $322 billion budget that includes little to no room for new funding for state programs. But it's the first time in 2 years the state would not report a deficit. The budget announcement also does not account for potential federal funding cuts that could come from the incoming Trump administration. That would force state lawmakers to make painful cuts to essential state programs like health care. Newsom previewed the new budget in Stanislaus County. Cap Radio's Laura Fitzgerald brings us more from his announcement.
Cal State Stanislaus sits in Turlock in the heart of the San Joaquin Valley. It was the latest stop on Newsom's economic tour around the state. He joined university leaders in an art workshop on campus to receive the region's economic plan. Its goal is to stimulate job growth in manufacturing, agriculture, and clean energy. Newsom also previewed the budget he'll officially present to the legislature later this week. He outlined budget top lines for over an hour, including a $322 billion balanced budget with the potential for a modest surplus. Newsom originally planned to deliver his budget presentation later this week, but gave an early preview so he could attend the memorial service for the late President Jimmy Carter in Washington. In the San Joaquin Valley, I'm Laura Fitzgerald.
Authorities in Inyo County have found the body of a hiker who went missing on Mount Whitney. As KVPR's Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado reports, the hiker disappeared in late December.
Authorities say 29-year-old Taylor Rodriguez attempted to hike the towering peak just before the New Year holiday. His body was found on Saturday at an elevation of 12,000 feet near the North Fork of Lone Pine Creek Trail. That's about 90 miles east of Fresno. Rodriguez is from the San Antonio area of Texas, according to news reports. Family and friends tell news outlets Rodriguez was not known for taking on such difficult hikes. Mount Whitney is one of the tallest peaks in the country at 14,000 feet elevation. Right now, it's experiencing severe winter conditions. Authorities have not released exact details on what led to Rodriguez's death. For KVPR News, I'm Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado.
The newest member of the Fresno City Council is hitting the streets today to mark his first day in office. Nick Richardson was elected to the Fresno City Council in November. Despite not having a well-known name, he challenged a prominent Fresno attorney for the District 6 seat. Today, he's embarking on a 15-mile walk from Northwest Fresno to City Hall in downtown. He's making several stops along the way and plans to finish at 1 p.m.
KVPR's vehicle donation program brings in thousands of dollars each month to support the news and information you rely on. If you've got a car, truck, motorcycle, or boat you're no longer using, please consider donating it. The process is easy. We'll tow it away free of charge, KVPR gets a check, and you'll get a receipt for your taxes. Find out more at kvpr.org/cars or call 855-277-2346.
And now to our main story. PFAS is a group of synthetic chemicals that just won't go away. That's why they're commonly referred to as forever chemicals. They can take hundreds, if not thousands, of years to break down. These forever chemicals are found in many products, such as nonstick pans, fire retardants, and waterproof clothing. But they're now being detected in unexpected places. Researchers and nonprofit groups are currently looking at how these forever chemicals are ending up in water wells of rural communities, including here in the Central Valley. Hannah Norman's a reporter for KFF Health News and recently reported on this ongoing research. She joined me for a conversation and gave me an overview of PFAS.
PFAS stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, a bit of a mouthful, but there are thousands of these chemicals, and they were originally invented in the 1940s to prevent stains and sticking. But exposure to PFAS has been linked to all kinds of health problems like cancer, decreased response to vaccines, low birth rate. And so there's been alarms that have been ringing for the past couple of decades, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, in your reporting, you talk about how PFAS is measured in parts per trillion, and you illustrate this by saying how 1 part per trillion is the equivalent of 1 drop of water in 20 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So now that we know that, what are scientists saying is an unhealthy amount of PFAS and other types of forever chemicals, let's say in water, in parts per trillion?
Yeah, well, so the goal is actually 0. But last year, the EPA established legally enforceable levels for drinking water for 6 PFAS, including 2 common legacy chemicals, PFOS and PFOA. And the limit for those is 4 parts per trillion.
Okay. So, as you mentioned, these forever chemicals had been used in products like Teflon pans, waterproof jackets, lots of things in people's homes, which is how they've actually detected PFAS and forever chemicals in people's blood in different water sources. In your reporting specifically, you focus on how PFAS and forever chemicals are now being found in water wells in rural areas. Tell us a little bit more about Juana Valle, who you spoke to, and her experience with these forever chemicals.
Yeah, definitely. So it's important to note that this came as a surprise. Juana did not expect to find PFAS when she was testing her well. She was actually looking for, nitrates and heavy metals, stuff like that. And so it was unexpected that it turned up in rural farmland, far from known contamination sites. Known contamination sites, I would say, are like industrial areas, airports, military bases. Those are where we commonly find PFAS chemicals. And so agricultural communities now face a potential new threat from them, and it's coming potentially through sources like fertilizer and pesticides, but it's pretty early stages in terms of testing for these. And so Juana lives in San Juan Bautista on the Central Coast, and is surrounded by farms and agricultural operations and is nowhere near any of the other sorts of sources.
You highlight research by UC Berkeley and the Community Water Center, who are working with Juana and many other people who have water wells on their property. One of the potential causes of this contamination is thought to be biosolids. I'd love for you to explain what biosolids are and how they affect people in these kind of agricultural areas.
Yeah, so it's a common practice of spreading solid waste from sewage treatment on farm fields that is treated and then able to be used. But in the process of kind of like wastewater treatment, PFAS also from other sources. So, for example, household products, cosmetics, in some cases, industry goes into the wastewater and then is not always filtered out. And so it can end up in the biosolids potentially. It is important to note that California, compared to other states, has relatively low levels of PFAS chemicals in their biosolids. However, it's still ending up there in low amounts. And PFAS also stays in the soil or the water for really long periods of times. It's actually nicknamed forever chemicals because it doesn't break down in the environment. And so that's how it could potentially accumulate. Let's say it was spread, decades ago. It could potentially still be there.
And when they're spreading these biosolids on ag land, I'm assuming that's for fertilizing purposes.
Yes, correct.
Okay. You report that a lot of the biosolids that end up here in the Central Valley are actually not originally from here. You cite how Los Angeles County hauls most of its biosolids to either Kern County or out of state, and say as much as 80,000 dry tons of biosolids have been applied to the Green Acres farm just outside of Bakersfield. That is a lot. Has there been any local pushback? How familiar are people with some of these consequences to the use of biosolids?
Yeah, so over a decade of legal battles that ended in 2017, in which Kern County was fighting the practice of spreading biosolids on farmland in their county. And ultimately, Los Angeles won the battle and has continued to spread biosolids on the farm. However, there was concern about health implications and environmental implications of the spreading.
Is there a way for them to remove PFAS from biosolids, or is that too complicated, or is the forever nature of these chemicals the root problem here?
Yes, so there are some filtration technologies, especially for water, that are a little complex to explain, but there are also emerging technologies for full-on destruction of PFAS chemicals. However, it's still kind of in the trial stages. And so that's something that people in the field are excited about potentially.
So for people who are concerned about contamination from these forever chemicals, can they do anything to limit their exposure?
Yeah, so I would say step one is potentially testing water in your homes. That's a good way to get a sense of your exposure. Groups like the Community Water Center are helpful in setting up testing. So that would be one big way to know how much you're exposed. And then secondly, thinking about, for example, Teflon, your nonstick pans, you could consider getting rid of those after you start seeing scratches, stuff like that. And other consumer items like rain jackets, if it's peeling, I would get a new one, stuff like that, where you're mitigating exposure to more PFAS.
Hannah Norman, reporter for KFF Health News. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
If you would like to see the current known levels of PFAS where you live, the nonprofit Environmental Working Group has mapped it out. You can find that resource at ewg.org/interactive-maps. And that's today's show. Today's episode was produced by Jonathan Linden and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
We could all use a little help navigating the news these days. The Consider This podcast wants to give you a hand. 6 days a week, we'll help you make sense of the day's biggest news story and what it means for you in less than 15 minutes. Listen now to the Consider This podcast from NPR.